Good morning, Kakadosh Shavua Tov. We're going to be continuing with Daf 78 in Masechet Pesachim Daf Amud Aleph. So basically, what's happening is the Gemara is going to push off and finally say the following. We're saying Lakashia. There's no question between the contradiction between the Shita of Rabbi Yoshua of our Mishnah. So he says it's not a problem. Why? Here we're talking about Rabbi Yoshua was talking about a Korban Yachid, which means that the service was done of an individual. So therefore, if it's done individual, there's not a din of lechatechila that he's allowed to do a betuma. Okay? But b'diavad, if you already did it, so then it's going to be merutze, it's going to be accepted. However, though, in a case where we're talking about kan bekorbanot tzibur, we're talking about korbanot tzibur. There by korbanot tzibur, since tuma was hutra betzibur, it's not only just dechuya. Tuma hutra betzibur. Remember, when I say tuma is dechuya betzibur, dechuya means it's pushed off, but it's v'diavad. Hutra means it becomes lechatechila. Okay, means it's permitted.
That means they can bring it and get atonement, but they can't eat it.
Yes, but here it says tuma is even lechatechila, and therefore you don't need the tzitz to come and to permit to forgive or to come and to actually atone, because you don't need that. Remember, the Kohen Gadol used to put on a frontal, which is basically right here. He used to put on his forehead a tzitz. On the tzitz, it was gold, and it was written Kodesh LaHashem. This was the extra 4 garments that belonged to the Kohen Gadol, more than a regular Kohen, and they were the golden clothing. So which means that on Kippur, when they used to go into the Kodesh Kodashim, they used to wear the white clothing. The majority of the clothing was white because en kategor na'asa senegor, which means that the accusation cannot become the defendant. Some people come, they always come and they always accuse. So then they can't all of a sudden come play after being the devil's advocate. They can't come and now play the defendant. So the one that's the defending party. Okay, fine. So now says the Gemara. Okay, and this is where we're going to start, right? Because this is where we finished off yesterday, right? That we sent it out on the YouTube already. So why do we say that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yosef? Why? The Tanya, as we learned in the Braita, Rabbi Eliezer says, what does that mean? The tzitz is going to be meratzeh. It's going to permit also the achilot. What does that mean? When you have a korban that's going to be eaten, when a person's tameh, anything to do with it, even the person that you're going to be eating, right? It's going to also meratzeh, which means the tzitz is also going to forgive or permit, whichever one you want to call it, on this as well. Rabbi Yosef argues, and he says, no. Rabbi Yosef omer, ena tzitz meratzeh la'achilot. It does not. It does not permit, it does not come and forgive or permit on any types of eatings. It's only on the actual bringing of it, but not the actual eatings of it. So, kasal kadaitach, I would have thought to say, midekama Rabbi Yosef, since Rabbi Yosef says, ena tzitz meratzeh la'achilot, ke Rabbi Yoshua sviralei, I would have thought to say that the fact that Rabbi Yosef says that the tzitz is not going to be meratzeh la'achilot, so he holds like Rabbi Yoshua, that he says ba'inan tarte, that means according to Rabbi Yoshua, you need both aspects of the korban in order for it to be kosher. You need the dam and the basar, the blood and the flesh, in order to do the avodah, which means that what happens if one of them got lost or got spilled or whatever the case is? So according to that, you can continue. So therefore, because if Rabbi Yosef would say, right, not like this, so then you don't need the necessity of the tzitz coming and to permit it or not to permit it. Because even without it, you could sprinkle the blood. So now I'm going to say that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yosef, because our Mishnah permits the bringing of the korbanot tzibur, and according to Rabbi Yosef, right, the tumat of the basar stops you, impedes you from bringing the sacrifices. Which means, one more time, our Mishnah, what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said that you're allowed to bring korbanot tzibur betuma. The only difference between the first cases, the first 5, and the latter one is that the first 5 you could bring it betuma, but you cannot eat it. And the last one, which was korban pesach, you could also eat it. That was the difference between them. But
the whole purpose is
exactly, but the whole purpose is eating. Very good. That was Mishnah. However, though, what did the Mishnah tell you? That you're allowed to bring them, but just not to eat it, correct? Now, according to Rabbi Yosef, if you're going to tell me now that he does not hold of Rabbi Yoshua, which means if you're going to tell me now, you don't need the tzitz to permit it. At the end of the day, it does not impede. That means even though you don't have the meat, you could still sprinkle blood. Or even if you don't have the blood, you could still use the meat.
What does it mean when it says the tumor of the meat should preclude the performance of the avodah?
Because once the meat becomes tameh, so now you cannot do anymore the rest of the avodah. Meaning, according to them, You need both aspects, the meat, the flesh, plus the blood, in order to do the sacrifice. If you have one of those components missing, you cannot do the rest of the sacrifice. You have the rest. No. And it's right here. It's just tameh. No, I'm not allowed to do it. Once I'm missing one of those components, whether it's the basar or the dam, the flesh or the blood, that's it. I cannot do the rest of the sacrifice. Okay? So he comes and he says, so obviously our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yosef. So says the Gemara, lo, I disagree with that. Why? He says, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Eliezer sirle. Rabbi Yosef holds like Rabbi Eliezer. Dam, that he says, dam afa pishem basar, which means in our Mishnah, the tumata basar does not impede the rest of the avodah. Which means the blood, as long as you have the blood is the more important of the two. Which means as long as I still have the blood, I could still bring it to the altar and some sprinkling it. I don't have the meat anymore. Why don't I have the meat? Because it became tameh. Doesn't matter. The meat is not important. The most important part of the sacrifice is going to be the blood. So the Gemara is going to ask, if so, so then what does it mean when Rabbi Yosef says that the tzitz is not going to be menatzel achilot? Right? At the end of the day, if you could do the service even without the meat, so what do I care that we're going to say now that the tzitz is going to be menatzer or not menatzer? Anyway, I cannot do anything with the meat, and I'm not going to do anything with the meat. The meat is tameh. I'm not going to touch the meat. So what do I need now the tzitz to do in order for me to use this? I don't need it at all. So says the Gemara, and according to your reasoning, Rabbi Eliezer damar tzitz menatzer. According to you, that Rabbi Eliezer holds that the tzitz is going to be menatzer. Kevan de Amar, now that we said dam afal pishem basar, now that we said that the blood, even though there's not going to be any meat, tzitz menatze al achilol ma'ilchata. So what is it coming to teach you? What halacha is it coming? You don't need the tzitz. The tzitz would only come and tell you that even though there's no meat, you could. But if you hold that anyway, you could do it even without the meat. So I don't need the tzitz for that. If I hold, I don't need the meat. So then why do I need the tzitz? I thought at the beginning that the tzitz was teaching you that even though you don't have the meat, you could still do it. Here we just said that you don't need that. Because even without that, you could bring it, even without the meat. So says the Gemara, no. But rather, we're talking about the reason why is because when you want to make it pasul, like pigul, right? Or to take it out of the isur of me'ilah, right? Now, just to give you again an overview, even though we've mentioned this 101 times, so I'm sure you remember it. Pigul means that you come and you do one of the services which are required, whether it's going to be the shechita, whether it's going to be the holacha, kabbalat adam, the receiving of the blood, the taking of the blood, the sprinkling of the blood. If you do one of those services and you think of doing it outside of the proper time, not outside of the proper place, because that's not pigul, right? Only outside of the proper time. If you think that you're going to do it outside of the proper time, which means whether I'm going to sprinkle it and I'm going to eat it outside of a proper time, or I'm going to sprinkle it outside of a proper time, whatever you do want it to do, that's called pigul. If you eat a pigul, you are chayav. Correct. Very good.
Yes. But only if another invalidation doesn't exist.
Yes. Now it says the Gemara. Also, there's a concept of isul milah. What is isul milah? We know that isul milah is that you're not allowed to benefit from kochim. That's called me'ilah. When you come and you are going to come and benefiting from kochim, so that's called the isul of milah. So therefore, he comes and he says over here,
Kochim
right? Hekdesh or kochim, the same thing. Okay, so it comes out that only when you finish the actual avodah, now the meat becomes permitted from milah, from the isur of milah. Meaning, as long as I didn't finish the entire service of the sacrifice, this meat is still susceptible for milah, which means if I'm going to benefit from this meat before actually finishing the entire sacrifice, I just did milah. So now it says like this. Now we're going to try to explain. Rabbi Eliezer holds that if the meat became impure, meratzeh tzitz laveh, so now the tzitz is going to come and is going to have an effect on it. Remember, the tzitz was on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol. Umashvile ketahor, and it makes it tahor. V'kavale bepigul, and therefore what's going to happen is it's going to make it like pigul, the psula pigul. Umapikle mimilah, and it's going to take it out of milah. Which means what happens is that this tzitz does have an effect. What does it have an effect? It makes it out now that it's like tahor. Okay, which means that the tzitz makes that the meat is like considered that it's tahor. Because it's still going to be considered tahor, right? There's going to be a problem of pigul if they continued the process, right, in the wrong fashion. Plus, it takes it out of milah, which means that even though it cannot come and make it that you're allowed to eat it, because again, you're not allowed to eat it, and the tzitz was not matir on the achilot, that's what we said mefurash, that the tzitz does not permit on eating, and that was the shita of Rabbi Yosef, but it does permit it in a way that it still makes it into pigul and it takes it out of the categorization of me'ilah. Okay, so it does have some effect. What is the effect? That means even though this meat became tameh, now by having the meat tameh, I would have said, listen, now you can't do anything with it. No, you're still allowed to bring it on the you're still allowed to sprinkle the blood on the altar. So he said, okay, fine. So if you're allowed to sprinkle the blood on the altar, so then what do you need the tzitz? No, the tzitz makes it that there's still applicable the laws of pigul, and it takes it out from the laws of me'ilah. Okay, so says the Gemara. Rabbi Yosef Savar, Rabbi Yosef holds. So that was the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yosef holds. Lo meratzeh tzitz lave. It does not make it wanted. Velo mashvile ketahor, and it doesn't make it tahor. Velo kavele bepigul, and it's not going to make it pigul. Yeah, what does that mean? That it's not going to make it pigul. So he says over here, right? The concept that we mentioned is as follows. Yeah. So basically, what are we trying to say? According to Shitat Rabbi Yosef says that it's not meratzeh the tzitz. Velo mashvile ketahor. Velo kavale bepigul. Velo mapik le mideh me'ilah, which means like this. What exactly is going on? According to Shitat Rabbi Yosef, if the meat became impure, so again, the tzitz does not have an effect on it. You could still bring the blood, but it does not have an effect on it. Since it does not have an effect on it, so what happens is that the blood, the zrikat adam, is not going to make it anymore pasul because of pigul, right? And it does not take it out of me'ilah, because one wasn't coming, they were both connected, which means that the second that you still have a pigul, so it's going to take it out of me'ilah. But here, you're not going to have either or, okay? So that's what it says here. The zrika is going to be kosher, right? In order that the person that brought the korban is going to be Yisrael Chovah. That's what the footnote says, because since he says that dam af pishem basar, the blood, even though there's no meat, but since the tzitz is not meratzeh, so it does not take it out of the yisur. It does not start the yisur of pigul. It does not make it chal on it, and it does not take it out of me'ilah. Okay, so you still have the problem of me'ilah, and you still have the problem of right pigul. Okay, which means that that's what we're trying to say until now. Okay, fine. So now it says over here like this. Okay, Matkif Rav Madi comes and he's going to ask the following question. Even though you just told me now that Rabbi Yosef holds like Rabbi Eliezer, that dam afal pishem basar, which means that the blood, even though you don't have the flesh, meaning the meat became tameh. But even though the meat became tameh, the blood was still here. So I could still use the blood to sprinkle it on the sacrifice. That was shitat Rabbi Eliezer. And that's what we just said that Rabbi Yosef holds like Rabbi Eliezer. So bishlam hazevachim, I understand korbanot tzibur, right? Why? Ikadam, because there is blood. What about Omer Nami? What about the Korban HaOmer? Korban HaOmer was the 16th of Sivan, of Nisan. We bring the Korban HaOmer, right? We reap the Omer, and that's what Sefirat HaOmer. That's the concept. Omer, the Korban HaOmer. We bring it from the barley, right? And that's going to be on the 16th of Nisan. And that's what permits Chadash. We had this on yesterday's daf, the permitter of Chadash. So therefore, by the Korban HaOmer, Ika Kometz. There's also the Kometz. Remember, the Kometz is when you do like this, and you pick up, that's called the Kamitzah. So you have the Kamitzah, and then you have the rest of the flour offering. Okay? Then you have Lechem HaPanim. The Lechem HaPanim are the 12 loaves that go on the Shulchan, on the table inside of the Echal. So Ika Bazichin, you have the spoons, or the shovels, whatever you want to call them, of frankincense. Ella Shtei HaLechem, but what are you going to do with the Shtei HaLechem? The Korban Shtei HaLechem was brought on Shavuot, Chazaku Baruch. And it was made out of wheat or barley? Wheat. Very good. The way to remember is that by barley, we were still acting like animals. So we were using barley, which is animal food. By Shtei HaLechem, by the Korban on Shavuot, we became Ki'ish Echad.
40 loaves.
No, that's the Todah. You're talking about the Todah. Korban Todah is a thanksgiving offering. When you say thank you to Hashem, you bring 40 loaves, 30 which are matzah, and 10 which are chametz. Right? No, the other one is also made out of wheat. It's just is it chametz or matzah? That's a difference, right? But it's not. But the sacrifice which is made out of barley is the one which is the Korban HaOmer, because we were still not united. Once we become united on Shavuot, we become like a human beings. Now we bring wheat and not barley, because wheat is the human beings' food, and the barley was the animal food. We had an entire Dvar Torah on that, if you remember. Okay. So says the Gemara, by Shtei HaLechem, what are you going to tell me? Why? Because Shtei HaLechem, everything is going to be eaten. So it comes out according to Rabbi Yosef, if the tzitz is not going to be meratzeh on achilot, so then what does it mean here? Then there's no chelek that the tzitz is going to be meratzeh. So therefore, how you bring it when it's tameh? I understand you're bringing all the other things in tameh because there's certain parts which is not tameh, so therefore it's going to be okay. But here, everything becomes tameh. If the shtei alechem became tameh, gamanu, there's nothing what to talk about. Right? It's not like the other things that you still have the other parts of the korban. Whether it's if the meat became tameh, you still have the blood. If the lechem apanim became tameh, you still have the bazichin. If the korban omer became tameh, you still have the kmitzah. Here you have nothing. There's nothing left. So says the Gemara, if you're going to tell me it's la karevi mahen, which means we're talking about the animals which is brought with the shtei alechem, meaning the korban shtei alechem was not brought by itself; it was brought with animals. So says the Gemara, haynu shalmet zibur. That's shalmet zibur already, which means we already learned that at the beginning of the Mishnah. There, the Mishnah brought down 5 cases, right? One of them was shalmet zibur. The shalmet zibur, right, already includes the animals which are brought with the shtei alechem. Then it brought down the korban omer and the shtei alechem and so on, but we already have that shalmet zibur. So if so, havulu arba. So then it's only 4 cases, not 5 cases in the Mishnah. You have the korban omer, the shtei alechem, lechem apanim, and sired rashe chodashim. Because when it says shtei alechem, the shtei alechem already included the shalmet zibur. So therefore, it's not 5 cases; it's 4 cases in the Mishnah. Right? Va'anan chamishat, and we learned 5 in our Mishnah. Everyone understood? One more time. We said in the Mishnah there were 5 cases that you could bring betum'ah, but you cannot eat it. The Korban Pesach, that's what the Seif of the Mishnah, the latter part of the Mishnah said, is the only one that could be brought and eaten in betum'ah. All the rest could only be brought, but not eaten. What are the 5? Korban HaOmer, Shtei Alechem, right? We have the Lechem HaPanim, Sirei Rashe Chodashim, and then we said Shalmet Zibur. Okay? So now, says the Gemara, I understand that whenever you're talking about sacrifices, if there's no meat, because the meat became disqualified, became tameh, so that you could still bring it, you could still bring the blood. Because there's still blood. There's no meat, there's still blood. Fine. What about the korban haomer? There's the kmitzah, the komets, right? You still have. That means even though part of it became tameh, you still have the kmitzah, which is tahor, so you could still bring it. What about lechem apanim? The levona. The levona is the right. Levana is the moon. Levona is the frankincense. Levana is the moon.
Oh, okay.
Kiddush Levana is the frankincense. Okay, so therefore, what happens is that you have the levona, the bazichin, these shovels or the spoonfuls of the frankincense. That in itself is still going to be pure. What about the shtei alechem? There's nothing there. Shtei alechem were the 2 loaves of bread brought on Shavuot. There's nothing there. So answers the Gemara, no, maybe we're talking about the animals that were brought with it. So says the Gemara, that was a shalmet zibur. Shalmet zibur were the animals that were brought with the shtei alechem. So now if you're going to tell me that that's the same thing, so in our Mishnah, then you only have 4 cases. You don't have 5, because we separated shalmet zibur and shtei alechem. According to you, shtei alechem and shalmet zibur is 1, because it's both the same concept. So says the Gemara, we learned on our Mishnah 5. So answers the Gemara, Ela kasava Rabbi Yosef. So you're right. Rabbi Yosef holds tuma hutra betzibur. It's not only just techuya, it's hutra, which means when I say it's hutra, the tzitz does not have to come and does not have to permit bringing the korbanot tzibur betuma, because it was hutra betzibur. So it comes out that you can bring the shtei alechem even though the tzitz is not meratzeh on the ochlim. So one more time, dechuya and hutra. What is the concept of dechuya and hutra? Dechuya and hutra means, is it just pushed off, or is it completely permitted? I'll give you an example.
Or it's permitted right away.
Exactly. I'll give you a very beautiful example, which is brought down, which is actually a machloket between the acharonim. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to come and I have muktzeh. I have a hammer. Yeah, hammer on Shabbat is muktzeh. What type of a muktzeh? Kli shemenachto liyisud. It's a utensil which I use for prohibited concepts. So now, a kli shemenachto liyisud, I'm allowed to use it sort of kufot, sort of mekomah. I could use the body of it, right? Or I could use it for the space. So if I needed the hammers on the table and I wanted to come and sit down and eat, I can move the hammer with my hand, right? Move the hammer with my hand. A lot of people don't know that, right? Or a pen. I've got it on the table. I can move the pen with my hand, put it wherever I want, and then I'm going to put my plate here, and I'm able to eat because I needed the space. Or I could use it for something else. So for example, I could come and I wanted to scratch my head. So I'm going to take a pen on Shabbat, and I'm going to start doing this, scratching my head. Why? I'm using the body of the pen to scratch my head. No problem. Okay, very, very good. Everything until you're simple. Very good. What happens if I have a nutcracker and I have a hammer and I want to crack open nuts? Should I use a nutcracker or should I use the hammer? So the Mishnah Brura is posek that if I have a kli shemenachto leheter and a kli shemenachto liyisur, so I cannot use the kli shemenachto liyisur, I have to use the kli shemenachto leheter. Yeah, why? Because this is kli shemenachto leheter. This is a nutcracker designed for the nuts. This is a hammer. I cannot use a hammer, right? That is a shita of.
And the nutcracker is not doing malacha.
Well, exactly. The nutcracker is not doing malacha. Exactly. That's why it's called permitted use, right? Or for example, I'm going to cut and I'm going to open up freezies on Shabbat. Should I use a knife or can I use a scissor? A knife is a kishmal tole eter. I cut meat. I'm allowed to cut meat on Shabbat. I'm allowed to cut vegetables. I'm allowed to cut. I'm allowed to use a knife. But the scissors is kishmal tole isur. So can I use the scissors to open up the freezy?
Scissors on Shabbat to open up a.
So that's what I'm saying. So according to the Mishnah Berurah, if you have a permitted utensil, you're not allowed to. That's a shita of the Mishnah Berurah. The Shminat Shabbat Kilchata, he wants to argue on the Mishnah Berurah, and he wants to say it's better not to, but he doesn't say it's a sur. He just says it's better not to. Yalkut Yosef and other for the Sfaradim, they say mutar lechatchila, no problem. What's the machloka between them? So the machloka between them is this. Do you say that when it's klisha nachtol isur is going to be pushed off because of gufo mekomo, is it dechuya or is it hutra? Is it pushed off or is it completely permitted? Is it overridden? What were the words? Overridden or the same type of argument? What does that mean? If you hold it's only overridden, so it's only overridden, but if I've got another choice, use a better choice, right? Exactly. So you have the other choice. So if I've got the knife and I've got the scissors, use the knife because I have the choice. It's only overridden. But if you hold that the entire concept is that it's completely permitted, which means that the second that I'm using it, it's 100% permitted for me to do whatever I want. So even I could take the knife, I could take the scissor and cut, and that's what I'm allowed to do. So that is the shita of the Sfaradim because it's hutra, it's not dichuya. So this concept is of again, it's we're learning it here, but it's not only here. It's actually it's a very it's used in many different halachot. Right, this concept. So it's very important to remember. Dechuya or hutra? Is it just pushed off or is it going to be completely permitted? Okay, is it completely permitted? Yeah, exactly. Hutra comes from the word mutar and dachui is dechuya. It's pushed off. Right? Okay, fine. So it says the Gemara, according to Shitat Rabbi Yosef, Tuma was hutra betzibur, not dechuya betzibur, hutra betzibur. So since it's hutra betzibur, so technically you don't need the tzitz to come and to start forgiving or permitting or all these things. No. Automatically, the sense that the second that Tuma was Hutra B'tzibur, you're allowed to bring these Korbanot B'tzibur, even though they are Tameim. Okay, and you don't need the tzitz at all. So says the Gemara, we're going to push this off as well. Vatanya, we learned to the right. Whether the Kohen Gadol that he's using it on the Yom Kippurim or the Kohen which is burning the Paraduma, they need to separate for the 7 days. Mazin alav kol shiva, you're going to sprinkle 7 times, the 7 days. Mikol chataot, from all the chataot, which means the water which is mixed up with the ashes of the paraduma. Shayusham, that were there in the Bet HaMikdash, right, in order to purify the people that were tamim. These are words that Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yosef says, he argues and he says, En mazin alav ela shlishi u'shvi bilvan. You don't do it every single day. You only do it on the 3rd day and the 7th day. Which means, and this is the way that we usually always go, which means like this. When a person becomes tamemet, they become tamet to a dead corpse. What do you usually do? You have to purify them. How do you purify them? You have to sprinkle the waters of the khatat, which is basically the waters of the paraduma. You take the paraduma, you burn it, you take the ashes, you mix it with water, and then that becomes the waters of the khatat. Mei khatat it's called. Okay, or the waters of the paraduma. So now what happens? What happens is that how do you purify a person? So here there's a machloka between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosef. According to Rabbi Meir, you have to sprinkle upon this person every single day of the 7 days. According to Rabbi Yosef, and this is how we usually go like, no, it's only the 3rd and the 7th day. Okay, that's what we have to do. Okay, so if you're going to tell me, Kasava Rabbi Yosef, that Rabbi Yosef comes and he says, Tuma utra betzibur, that Tuma was utra betzibur, which means it was permitted betzibur, lama li hazah klal? Why do you need to have to do bichlal hazah, the sprinkling? Avodat Yom Kippurim is an avodah of the tzibur. And therefore, we don't have to start worrying about if it's going to become tameh or not. Why? Because according to Shtat Rabbi Yosef, the only reason why you have to come and you have to sprinkle is in order to stop a concept of tumah. Now, it doesn't matter because obviously it has to be that tumah was only dechuya, not hutra. Because if you're going to tell me now that it's going to be hutra, why do you have to sprinkle anything on top of it? One more time. The service on Kippur is communal. It's public. It's not an individual. It's public. So if it's public, I don't care about tumah, correct? So now, if I don't care about tumah, why do you have to start sprinkling upon the Kohen Gadol right before Kippur on the 3rd and the 7th or every single day? Why? Because just in case of tumah. But even if there's going to be tumah, I don't care, right? Why? Because I don't have a problem of tumah here. right? According to what we're just mentioning here. So obviously you have to tell me that according to Shitat Rabbi Yosef, he obviously holds that the entire concept was only the Chuya by the Tzibur, not
in
Hutra.
Hanukkah, they were extra careful not to use the tumah
Exactly,
oil.
they went above and beyond. Exactly. So Ela Machvarta Matnitin de lo Rabbi Yosef. So therefore you're right. Our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yosef. Okay, which means that it's much better just to say that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yosef, right, than to come saying that it is like Rabbi Yosef, as if not you have the problem. Okay, fine. Next, the Gemara is going to go back to the Braita where we spoke about Rabbi Yosef that he said above. Amale Rav Papa Abaye says Rav Papa to Abaye. Rabbi Yosef, and according to Rabbi Yosef, Shetara Mezak Lebet Trehu. He says what? He's Mezakeh the shtar to two different people, right? First, I'm going to explain to you the expression, and then afterwards, I'm going to tell you what we're going to explain what is it talking about. Usually, whenever you're going to borrow money, you write a document. If you pay back now, what happens? So, for example, let's say I'm going to borrow money from Laurent. So what happens is that Laurent, I'm going to write a document that I owe Laurent the money. I give it to Laurent. Now, what happens is that if I pay it back, Laurent usually has to destroy the document. Plus, he gives me usually a receipt, a shovar. Right? The shovar is like a receipt.
One or the other,
right?
I mean,
or one or the other, but many times also give a receipt. Right? That's just the way that it is, just to be careful. Right? But also, he's not allowed to leave a document in his house. So now what happens? We go to court, chas v'shalom. And now all of a sudden, the betting says the halacha is like both of us. How could that be? You're mizakeh, the shtar, you're making zoche, you're meriting the document to two different people, to the one that's the accusation and the one that's the defendant. How do you do that? It's either one's right or one's wrong. It cannot be that they're both right. You understand? That means there's something here, right? So what does that mean? Now we're going to try to explain what's going on. So the time is we learned in a braita. Amar Rabbi Yosef, says Rabbi Yosef, Royani divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'zvachim, v'divrei Rabbi Yoshua b'zvachim. I see the words of Rabbi Eliezer in Zivachim and the words of Yoshua in Zivachim. Right? Now we're going to have to understand what does that mean. Right? What does that mean? The words of Eliezer Menachot and the words of Yoshua Menachot. Right? So now let's explain. Okay? What does that mean? So I hold like Rabbi Eliezer in Zivachim and sacrifices that he said that dam, even though there's no meat. Which means, even though, again, one of the components became disqualified, and here, but it has to be the component of the meat. The flesh became disqualified because of tum'ah, right, because of impurity. I could still bring the blood. That's the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, and that's how I see the words of Rabbi Eliezer more than Yeshua and Zivachim. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, Divrei Rabbi Yeshua b'Zivachim, shaya omer, im en dam en basar, im en basar en dam. Now, the exact opposite. I see the words of Rabbi Yoshua that basically if there's no blood, there's no meat. If there's no meat, there's no blood. So that means right now I already have a contradiction. Before I even move on, before anywhere where I go, I have a contradiction. Because the first opinion, Rabbi Eliezer said that even though there's no meat, I could still use the blood and sprinkle the blood and it could still be an atonement for the owners. And the next second, what am I coming in and I'm saying? The next second I'm coming and I'm saying, like Rabbi Yoshua, that I need both. And if I have the meat without the blood or the blood without the meat, wallow, there's nothing there. So that's one contradiction. Okay? Number two, right? Then it says, according to Shidat Rabbi Eliezer, I hold like him in Menachot in the meal offerings, that he says, even though if I have a kmitza, even though I don't have the rest of it. Which means, remember, there's a kmitza, which I come and I take like this. This fistful or palmful, whatever you want to call it, is called the kmitza. The leftovers, whatever's left over in the meal offering is called the shiraim, right? The leftovers. Right, like the shiraim of the Rebbe. Yeah, you know that the Rebbes have a tish. You know what a tish is, right? You go. I've gone. It's something incredible. You know, you for the first time you see it, you think that I don't know where you are. You understand? So what happens? The Rebbe comes and he starts eating a little bit, and then he leaves some left over, and then everybody starts eating, and they start partaking, right? And they start enjoying themselves, right? I could see Richard in one of these things. Yeah. So what happens is that, right? It says over here. The kmitza, what? No, now they're all closed. Yeah, exactly. Nowadays it's all going to be closed with the viruses and everything. That's it. Yeah, close everything down. Yeah. So it says over here, right? So now the Divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'Menachot, because he used to say the comments even though there's no leftovers. And Rabbi Yoshua b'Menachot, because he used to say Imen Sham Shiraim and comments, Imen comments and Shiraim, which means that again so it's the same concept by both, whether it's by the Zerachim or Menachot. It's just he separated them. So in one of them, he's holding like Rabbi Eliezer, that as long as you have the blood, I don't care about the meat, or as long as I have the komets, even though I don't have the shiraim, the leftovers. And the other one, then he comes and saying, I hold like Rabbi Yeshua on both, which means I hold like Rabbi Yeshua that if there's no meat, there's no blood, no blood, no meat. Or I hold like Rabbi Yeshua that if there's no komets, there's no shiraim, no komets. So basically, that's a contradiction. So therefore, the question is, how is he mizakeh b'shtara lebeitrei? How is he mizakeh? How is he giving the shtar to both opinions? It's either you pass like one or the other. They're both contradictions. So you can't hold both. So Amalei, you understood the question?
More or less.
Very good. Yeah. So Amalei, so he comes and he says, Mistabra ka'amar. Right? It's only mistaber. What does that mean, mistaber? He's just coming and he's saying it's logical. Kikai bizvachim, amar mistabra ki'echid depligi bizvachim, pligi nami b'menachot. What happened was that when he was dealing with zivachim, and Masechet Zivachim, and they got to this machloket, he said they're probably having the exact same machloket to do with menachot. In Kaim Menachot, when he was in Masechet Menachot and learning Menachot, he said, Mistabra, this is the same machloket that they have in Menachot, they have the exact same thing in Zivachim. Which means,
one is meal offering.
Exactly, which means that when Rabbi Yosef was coming and he was speaking about in two different places. So because of that, right, it wasn't in the same place, which means that when he was dealing with Zivachim, which is Masechet, remember the two different Masechtot. There's Masechet Zivachim, and then there's Menachot, the sacrifices, and then the meal offerings. So when he was dealing with Masechet Zivachim, which is the sacrifices, what happened was, he said, just like the Machloket is here, the Machloket is also Menachot. Well, then when he went to Menachot, and he was learning in Yichot Menachot, he said, just like the Machloket is Menachot, so too it's going to be in Zivachim. So too it's going to be in the sacrifices. Which means that it wasn't that he taught that in the same place. Because if he taught in the same place, you have a big contradiction. Like, what's going on over here? You understand? But rather, no, it was because it was in two different places. So says the Gemara, okay, fine. I understand that when he was dealing with Masechet Zivachim, Amar, he said, just like they were going to be talking about Zivachim, right? So therefore, it makes sense, right, that they're also going to be arguing Menachot. Tikar Krai, but the main pasuk is dealing with Zivachim, which means that the Yesod and Machloket is brought down by Zivachim and not by Menachot. So the Machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Yeshua, because it said over there, Ve'asita olotecha basar adam, right? You did the olah, the basar and the dam, the flesh and the meat, the dam zevachecha, and the blood of the sacrifices, yishafecha al mizbach Hashem, ve'basar tochen, and you eat the meat. So Rabbi Yosef is coming to teach you the Machloket is also to do with Menachot, which makes sense. Which means the main machloket, meaning the pasuk, is dealing with zivachim. Comes the Rabbi Yosef, and he tells you the machloket is not only by zivachim, it's also by menachot. But when he was in Masechet Menachot, and then he comes and he says, Mistabra kich de pligi b'menachot, pliginam b'zachim, and then he comes and he says that it's logical to say that the same machloket they have by menachot, they have by zivachim. Vayikra b'zvachim u'l'ktiveh. The main pasuk is talking about zivachim. So what are we talking about then? You understand? Meaning, obviously, I'm saying this is the Mekor, this is the main place. Meaning like this, we thought at the beginning that he was coming and he was trying to be Mizakeh Shtar al Betre, means that he came and he said, I paskin like this guy here, and then what's going on? Does it make sense? He says, no, he wasn't paskin. He was saying it's just logical. What does it logical mean? Meaning when he was learning Zivachim, he said it's logical, the exact same malachot that applies to Menachot. When he was learning Menachot, he says it's logical to say that the same machlok applies to Zivachim. That's all there was. So now the Gemara asks on this, it doesn't make sense. Why? Where's the main place? The main place is Zivachim. Why is the main place Zivachim? Because the pasuk is talking about Zivachim. The pasuk says on this pasuk where we're talking about, and the machlok it's based upon Zivachim. So now when he's learning Zivachim and he wants to apply it to Menachot, it makes sense. But the other way around doesn't make sense. Because if he's in Menachot and he says, you know what? Scratching his head, I think that this same machloket is going to be by Zivachim. The pasuk is talking about Zivachim. Obviously, it's talking about Zivachim. So what's the chidush? What are you telling me, Rabbi Yosef? So says the Gemara, Ela la kashya, but no, really, it's not a question. What does it mean? It's not a question. Really, be'emet, I hold like the same person in both. It wasn't that I hold like Rabbi Eliezer and Zivachim, and then Rabbi Yoshua Menachot, and then I say that they both are the same machloket, so how could you? No. I hold like Rabbi Eliezer, whether in Zivachim and Menachot, do it one halacha. And I hold like Rabbi Yoshua, whether in Zivachim and Menachot, and another halacha. If it's nitma, which means it became impurified, but the meat is still here. The meat is still here, but it was nitma. It became defiled. It became impure. Then I hold like Rabbi Eliezer. Whether it's in zevachim or menachot, doesn't matter what. I hold like Rabbi Eliezer. Why? It's still present, but it just became defiled. It became impure. However, though, what happens if it got burnt or it got lost? Now I hold like Rabbi Yoshua. Doesn't matter whether we're talking, which means that I need both components. And once one gets lost, kaddish, I can't use the other one. Whether in zevachim or menachot, because now it actually makes sense. Now I'm putting them both together, which means halacha is always the same, whether in zevachim or menachot. And there's still not a contradiction, because I'm holding like Rabbi Eliezer in one halacha, and I'm holding like Rabbi Yoshua in another halacha. When it's tum'ah, I hold like Rabbi Eliezer, which means dam afa pi shem basar, blood even though there's no meat, or the komets even though there's no shiureah, right? Or all these things, right? But when it's going to be not tameh, but rather it got lost or burnt, I hold like Rabbi Yoshua. It has to be both. If I'm missing one of them, that's it. Clear until here?
Well, I wouldn't pass the test.
Okay, but you understood at least.
I have an idea of the concepts involved.
Okay, very good. Laurent, you with me?
It makes more sense.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone wants me to repeat?
No.
You want me to repeat?
That's too much for Daf Yomi.
Okay, fine. Okay. Says the Gemara, "Benitzmai matama mishum demiratzatz." Now we're going to explain the reasoning of Rabbi Yosef. What's the reasoning? Why did Rabbi Yosef say that by nitzma it was a different deen than avud v'saraf? Remember, ne'evad v'sar nisraf means that it got lost or burnt. Lost or burnt, it's not here. So we thought that the difference is one's here, one's not here. No. He says very simple. You know what the difference between them is? Rabbi Yosef paskins like Rabbi Eliezer benitzma because of the tzitz. The tzitz is miratzeh. Mishum demiratzeh tzitz, which means, remember, the tzitz, which is the front plate on top of the Kohen Gadol, which has Kodesh Lashem, that's going to come and it's going to be miratzeh, that if it's going to be any type of a tumah, it's going to be okay. So miratzeh means that it makes it good. That means even though it's tameh,
it's
going to be okay.
Not needed.
That was at the beginning. It was at the beginning. One second. Now we're saying, right? Now we're saying that it is needed. So he says, Hashama Rabbi Yosef damad enatzitz miratzeh lachilot. 1 second. But now that's what Richard's asking. He jumped the gun. And he said, 1 second. I thought that you told me a few minutes ago that according to Rabbi Yosef, enatzitz miratzeh lachilot, which means that there's no difference between tameh and other cases, whether it's lost or burnt. It's the same thing. Because tameh, according to Rabbi Yosef, the tzitz is not miratzeh. So says the Gemara, Ela la kashya, it's not a question. Roeh ani et divrei Rabbi Eliezer betzibur, v'roeh ani et divrei Rabbi Yoshua biyachid. Meaning like this. Beforehand, we thought that at the beginning, right, each one, we came and we started asking. The first answer is that there's a difference between nitma and nisraf and nevad, which means tameh, impure, but it's still here, and if it was lost or burnt. Now we're saying they're both the same. Why? Because we could not answer that anymore, because we thought that the answer was because of the tzitz. The tzitz is not miratzeh according to him. So what's the answer? So he comes and he says the answer is, right, the entire concept that we're mentioning now is that really no. There's a difference in korbanot tzibur and korbanot yachid. If it's a communal sacrifice or it's an individual sacrifice. So therefore he comes and he says, I see the words of Rabbi Eliezer, the korbanot tzibur, right? Why? Because anyway, you're going to eat it. So therefore in such a sacrifice there, even though you don't have all the components, it's going to be okay. And I see the words of Rabbi Yoshua only in a korbanot yachid, that if it became tameh, right now why? Betzibur my tama mishum de tuma utra betzibur, because tuma was utra betzibur, right? So therefore we don't need the tzitz at all. So according to this klal, even though Rabbi Yosef says that the tzitz is not miratzeh lachilot, the korban tzibur, which became tameh, you don't need the tzitz. But the korban yachid, right, that becomes tameh, right? So since it's going to be pasul like Rabbi Yoshua, so therefore what happens, because the tzitz is not miratzeh, so now you have a problem. So now we're going to say, 1 second. Are you going to tell me that the tzibur is because tuma utra betzibur? Chada deshama le Rabbi Yosef tuma dechuya tzibur. We learned a few minutes ago that according to Rabbi Yosef, it wasn't hutra, it was dechuya. So you can't answer me this. The order and the second thing was, ibet tzibur, if we're talking about a tzibur, Rabbi Eliezer machshir v'lo Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Eliezer is the only one that says that it's kosher. Rabbi Yoshua, no? Right? I thought we said, ha'amarta filu Rabbi Yoshua modeh. I thought that even Rabbi Yoshua is going to be modeh, that it's going to be permitted. Right? We're on Ayin Chet Amud Bet. Okay? We're coming up to a Mishnah. So Mishnah usually is something new. So hopefully you'll be able to catch up again. Right? But one more time before continuing. right? We had two questions against what we just mentioned now. We just differentiated between now that when does Rabbi Yosef paskin like Rabbi Eliezer and when does he paskin like Rabbi Yoshua? Korbanot tzibur, korbanot yachid. If it's korban tzibur, he paskins like Rabbi Eliezer. If it's korban yachid, he paskins like Rabbi Yoshua. So ask the Gemara, why are you? What is the svara? What's the logic to say such a thing? Are you going to tell me because tumahu trabet tzibur? Number one, we just proved right at the beginning of today. We thought of saying in Shitat Rabbi Yosef that tumahu trabet tzibur, and then afterwards we retracted. And we said that according to Rabbi Yosef, Tumah was dechuya betzibur. So you cannot tell me that. That's number one. And remember, if it's Tumah dechuya betzibur, you do need the tzitz. And we already said that according to Rabbi Yosef, the tzitz is not merateh. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, right? Why are you telling me now that if it's going to be Tumah betzibur or yachid, if it's going to be Tumah betzibur, it's according to everybody. It's not only according to Rabbi Eliezer. Because even Rabbi Yoshua agrees that by tzibur it's going to be permitted. So for what are you telling me that he passes like Rabbi Eliezer by tzibur and like Rabbi Yoshua by yachid? By tzibur, everybody agrees. It's not Rabbi Eliezer, it's everybody. So says Ayin Chetam Bet, Ela Barad, Royani dever Rabbi Eliezer b'diavad v'Rabbi Yoshua lechatchila. He says no. I paskin like both of them, but one's a lechatchila, one's b'diavad. This one actually makes a lot of sense as well. All of them made sense until we push them off, right? But this one's also a beautiful one. Why? I paskin always lechatchila like Rabbi Yoshua, which means that I always need both components of the sacrifices, whether it's the blood and the meat, whether it's going to be the komets and the leftovers. I always need both. However, though, I pass like Rabbi Eliezer b'diavad, which means if you already did it, so then it's going to be okay, because that's b'diavad. So lichat techila, you're right. We always pass like Rabbi Yoshua. It doesn't matter where you are. But b'diavad, we always pass like Rabbi Eliezer. That makes sense. So says the Gemara, b'diavad, afilu Rabbi Yoshua nami modehu dektani. Right? Modeh Rabbi Yoshua, shim zera kurza. Says 1 second, that also doesn't make sense, this answer. Because according to Rabbi Yoshua, he also agrees by everything that b'diavad it's okay. Meaning, Rabbi Yoshua was only dealing with the lechatechila. Because Rabbi Yoshua says, lechatechila, you're not allowed to do it. But if you did come and you did sprinkle the blood, even though you don't have the meat, urza, b'diavad it is going to be okay. So therefore, don't answer to me that Rabbi Yosef is paskening like Rabbi Yoshua lechatechila and Rabbi Eliezer b'diavad. Because even Rabbi Yoshua holds b'diavad, it's okay. So don't tell me that I'm paskening like Rabbi Eliezer lechatchila, Rabbi Yoshua b'diavad. Rabbi Yoshua also agrees b'diavad, it's okay. So I mean that's according to everybody. So there's no machlok in it. So says the Gemara, you're right. Ha betumah, ha be'avud v'saruf. You're right. What does that mean? One, Rabbi Yoshua was talking about if it's tumah, and Rabbi Yosef is talking about if it got lost or it got burnt. And now we're going to explain. Kikatani mod Rabbi Yoshua. When did Rabbi Yoshua say that he admits shim zara kurza, that if you sprinkle the blood that it's going to be okay b'diavad? That's only benitma. That's only if it became tameh. But in a case of avuz v'saruf, in a case of that if it got lost or it got burnt, lo, that means even b'diavad it's not going to be good. Rabbi Yosef, when did Rabbi Yosef say royani divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'diavad? Be'avuz v'saruf, even in the case of avuz v'saruf, which means l'maskana. One more time, but this is how we actually finished off. So the maskana, what happens is like this: we had the Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, machloke between them. Rabbi Eliezer says, even though I don't have both components, it's always going to be kosher. Rabbi Yoshua says, even if I don't, if I don't have both components, it's not kosher. Now Rabbi Yosef comes and he says, it appears to me like Rabbi Eliezer, and in one place he says it appears to me like Rabbi Yoshua. Now it doesn't make sense because you can't say both; they're both arguing. So at the beginning we started saying no. What happened is that they were talking about the two different Masechtot. Rabbi Yosef was talking about in Zivachim, so he said that the halacha applied to Menachot, and when it was a Menachot, he said that the halachot applied to Zivachim. Says the Gemara, you can't say that. Why? Because the Ikar was written by Zivachim. So if you were by Zivachim, then you said it also applies to Menachot, that makes sense. But if you're by Menachot, and then you say it also applies to Zivachim, doesn't make sense. The Ikar is by Zivachim. So you can't say that answer. Very good. So now we're going to come and we're going to have a series of answers. Okay? You're with me, Richard, or no? You have a series of answers. Okay? So the first answer was, which was the first answer? Before the Yachid and the, right? The first one was, right, the Tzibur and the Yachid, right? You also had, the first answer was, what was the first one? Of the Avad, the Nisraf, and Nitma, right? Are you listening? Nitma and Avad and Nisraf. There are three answers, by the way. Okay, the first one was Nitma, Avav, and Israf. We pushed it off.
Which is overriding.
No. Overriding is going to be inside of those. Inside of those, we're going to get into overriding, but that's not here yet.
What does Nitma mean?
Nitma means it became impurified.
Okay.
Nisraf means it got burnt, and Nevad means it got lost. So we're always getting lost and burnt together, and nitma is always separate, getting impurified. Okay, so now 1 second. So now that was the first answer. Second answer was korbanot tzibur yachid. Third answer was lechatechila b'diavad. Each one, when we're going to bring them down, we're going to disprove them. So the first answer was what? Nitma and avad v'nisraf. So he wanted to say that if it's going to be nitma, I paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. If it's going to be nevad v'nisraf, that means if it's impure, right? So I'm going to paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. That basically you're allowed to bring it even though you don't have both components. If it's going to be burnt or lost, I paskin like Rabbi Yoshua. The Gemara pushes that off. Why does the Gemara push that off? The Gemara pushes that off because the Gemara comes and it says, how could you come and you tell me that that's going to be the difference between them? First of all, right, he says that according to Shitat Rabbi Yosef, the tzitz is not meratzeh. If the tzitz is not meratzeh, which means that tzitz does not come and does not make anything to become better, so therefore, according to that, so then what would it mean, right, that there's no difference between nitma and nisraf neva? There's no difference. The only difference between impurification is only if it's going to be that the tzitz is going to come and the tzitz is going to purify. Because remember, the tzitz is miratzeh on tum'ah. But if you're going to tell me that the tzitz does not do this process, so therefore, what's the difference between nitma and nevad v'nisraf? It's all the same halachot. Exactly. You still have the meat present, but it's just impure. And the tzitz is miratzeh. The tzitz makes it kosher. It makes it okay. It's not here, right? But again, it's all the tzitz. So we push that off. So what was the second answer? Korbanot tzibur and korbanot yachid. What's the concept between korbanot tzibur and korbanot yachid? So says the Gemara, korbanot tzibur and korbanot yachid is what? Is that, so he said, 1 second. If you're going to tell me that, that's only if Tuma was hutra b'tzibur. And Rabbi Yosef does not hold of hutra b'tzibur. Right? What does that mean? Right? We said two things. First of all, hutra b'tzibur and the chuya b'tzibur. And number two also, even Rabbi Yoshua was going to be modeh in such a case. Okay, so therefore he comes and he says, so you cannot tell me that the entire concept was to do with the tzibur and the yachid, korbanot tzibur and korbanot yachid. Right? Again, one more time. The second answer.
You lose me when you use the Hebrew words.
Okay, fine. Sorry. Communal and individual sacrifices. That was the second answer.
Yeah.
Which means that I hold like Rabbi Eliezer in communal sacrifices. I hold like Rabbi Yoshua in individual sacrifices. Okay. Says the Gemara, it doesn't make sense. Why? Because first of all, according to Rabbi Yosef, Tuma was dechuya betzibur, was pushed off, overridden. It wasn't permitted betzibur. So therefore, there's no difference between a tzibur and a yachid in such a case. Because here, if it's number two also, right? Rabbi Yoshua agrees with the concept in a tzibur, which means he agrees in the concept of communal sacrifices. He's the same thing like Rabbi Eliezer, right? He also agrees. So then, what was the third answer? Lechatechila b'diavad. Lechatechila b'diavad means, right? You open it.
That makes the most sense.
Right? Lechatchila b'diavad, we pushed that off also. Lechatchila b'diavad was that I hold like Rabbi Eliezer lechatchila, I hold like Rabbi Yoshua b'diavad. Well, why do we push it off? The reason why we pushed it off is because even Rabbi Yoshua is modeh that b'diavad it's also okay. So if Rabbi Yoshua admits that b'diavad it's also, then he's post factum. B'diavad is post factum. B'diavad it's going to be okay. So then what does Rabbi Yosef come? And he's a rocket scientist and he comes and tells you, by the way, I paskin, I see the words like Rabbi Eliezer, lechatechila and Rabbi Yoshua b'diavad. Say, Chachamim, I don't understand you. Even Rabbi Yoshua said b'diavad, it's okay. So therefore, what are you talking about? That I hold like Rabbi Eliezer lechatchila and Rabbi Yoshua b'diavad. Even Rabbi Yoshua said b'diavad, it's okay. So Rabbi Yoshua holds like Rabbi Eliezer also. So the Gemara, so we go back to the first original answer. What was the first original answer? The first original answer is the difference between impurity and burnt and lost. So what do we say? We said, when does Rabbi Yoshua say that it's going to be good, right? It's only going to be good if it became tameh, but not if it was lost or it got burnt. So it comes and he says, right? So he says that that's the b'diavad case, in the b'diavad. So actually, the truth is, you're actually correct. We're actually combining. It's not that we're going back to the original answer by itself. We're combining both answers. We're combining lechatechila b'diavad with the combination of nitma and nisraf nevad, which means, I guess, one more time. We obviously, Rabbi Eliezer is saying lechatechila, and that's what Rabbi Yosef was saying. Rabbi Yosef is saying, I hold like Rabbi Eliezer lechatechila, and like Rabbi Yoshua b'diavad. We asked, 1 second, even Rabbi Yoshua holds b'diavad, it's going to be okay. He says, no. Rabbi Yoshua only holds b'diavad, it's going to be okay if it was nitma.
What's nitma?
If it became impure. If it was burnt or lost, it's not good according to b'diavad, according to Rabbi Yoshua. Comes Rabbi Yosef and says, I hold like Rabbi Eliezer in that case as well. That means that's why I'm holding like Rabbi Eliezer lechatechila, right? Rabbi Yoshua also holds b'diavad. You're right. Rabbi Yoshua holds b'diavad, but only in impure. I hold like b'diavad, even in the case of nevad v'nisra. So in that aspect, I'm not like Rabbi Yoshua. But I do hold like Rabbi Yoshua and b'diavad in the normal cases, in the other cases.
What's this around the lost in bird?
That's what he says. So he says, aval, avud v'saruf, it's going to be burnt or lost. Lo, I don't hold like Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua does not admit. Ki ka'amar Rabbi Yosef. So when Rabbi Yosef came and he said, Rabbi Eliezer b'diavad, it's in that case itself. Avud v'saruf. If it's going to be lost or burned. That means if it's going to be, but to do the case of lost or burnt, that is the machlok between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. That is the case. So Rabbi Yosef says, lechatechila, you have to say it's asur, but b'diavad, it's going to be okay, like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua agrees. No, Rabbi Yoshua doesn't agree in that case. That's the only case where Rabbi Yoshua does not agree.
The blood will do the
The blood will be okay. Okay?
Not for the faint of heart.
Capish? Okay? Mishnah. Everyone clear until here? Abachaki, Jean-Paul, Simon, everyone clear?
I cannot say that that's clear, but I'm here.
Okay, very good. Okay, fine. Let's continue. Mishnah.
It's better in the room. It's better. We understand better in the room.
Yeah,
Not simple.
100%. Okay, fine. Says the Mishnah. Nitma basar v'chelev, right? Nitma basar v'chelev kayam. Eno zoreket adam. So to do with the Korban Pesach, if the meat became disqualified, v'chelev kayam, and the prohibited fats are kayam, yeah, so then, right, eno zoreket adam, you're not allowed to throw the blood on the mizbeach. By the way, you should know, just before continuing, you have in the art scroll a sikum. You have a, how do you call it, a summary, right, of the entire thing that we just mentioned now. Sikum, you have Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yosef. You have it there?
I didn't see that.
So the Mishnah said again one more time, if right now, nitma habasar, right, so the meat of the Korban Pesach became impure. V'chelev kayam, so and the chelev is still here, so you're not allowed to throw the blood on the mizbeach. However, though, im nitma chelev, if the chelev became impure, and the basar is kayam, and the meat is still here, right, zoreket adam, you're allowed to throw the blood. Okay, you're allowed to throw the blood. Uvamekudoshim, by other korbanot, enoken, it's not like that. Even though the meat became tameh and the chelev kayam, zoreket adam, right? Even though the meat became impure and the chelev is still kayam, you're allowed to sprinkle the blood. Now, obviously, we have to actually understand what exactly are we talking about. Like, why is this? So says the Gemara. Okay? So again, we made another differentiation between the Korban Pesach and other Korbanot. Remember, that was also last Mishnah. Last Mishnah, we made the differentiation that you're allowed to bring Korbanot to Tzibur, but you're not allowed to eat them. The Korban Pesach, you're allowed to bring them and eat it. Right? Here, another differentiation. Okay? So now it says like this. Amar Rav Gidal Amar Rav. Says Rav Gidal in the name of Rav. Im zarak hurtza. If a person was avad and they spilled, they went and they poured the blood, the yisur, but the avad, it's going to be okay. Okay, so again, one more time. You had a case of the nitma, the basar of the Pesach. We said you're not allowed to sprinkle the blood, but if you did, but the avad, it's going to be okay. So ask the Gemara, but I thought that you have to eat it. Okay? So says the Gemara, achila lo me'akva. The achila is not me'akev, which means the kapara is not me'akev, meaning that you don't need for an atonement, you don't need the eating. The avodah is going to be kosher and the korban is going to be okay, even if you didn't do the eating at all. Meaning the main part of the korban is the bringing the korban and sprinkling the blood. After that, it doesn't impede. So ask the Gemara, ve'akti, but it's written by Korban Pesach, ish lefi ochlo tachol osol aseh, which means that the kat of the tzivui, the Pesach, is to eat it. And that's what we learned in the last Mishnah. Right? The reason why we said last Mishnah that you're allowed to eat the Korban Pesach, even betumah, is because the kat of the Korban Pesach is to eat. So how can you tell me right now, no, you don't really need to eat it? I thought that was the main part of the Korban Pesach. So answers the Gemara, le mitzvah. It's only a mitzvah lechatechila to eat the Korban Pesach. But if you didn't, it's still going to be okay. So says the Gemara, v'lakev lo, are you going to tell me that it doesn't really impede? V'atanya, we learned in a Braita, v'lakachu shcheno akarov b'misat nefashot. What does it mean misat? Melamed she'ena pesach nishchat al-miyav. You could only slaughter the Korban Pesach for the ones which are subscribed. Do you remember? that was the word that they used? Registered or subscribed to it. Right? Which means that this we learned already before. You remember? Yeah, which means that only for the people that are registered in that group, that are subscribed to that group. If you're not, doesn't help. So So I would have thought that if I'm going to do it for people that are not registered, right, that I'm going against the mitzvah lechatechila, but it's still going to be kosher. hakatuv shana alav le'akev. It even impedes b'diavad, which means that it does impede. So there's nothing what to do. Okay?
They repeated it, that's why.
Yeah. So he says over here, v'it kash ochlin limnuyim. What does that mean? There's a kesh, the ochlin to the minuyim, which means the eating of it to the ones which are subscribed to it. Okay? So it says over here that it's going to be me'akev. So it says, right, if so, in our case, the basar is, which is nitma, and it's a sur to eat it, yipasela korban afil b'diavad. So it's going to be a pasul even b'diavad. Ela Rav Damar Rav Natan. But rather Rav, he comes and he says like Rav Natan. Damar achila Pesachim no me'akva. That according to him, he's going to say that achila Pesachim is not me'akev. That means our Mishnah, right, Rav, that he says that it's going to be kosher b'diavad, is going to shtav Rabbi Natan, that according to him, it's not me'akev b'diavad. Okay, and he's going to argue, obviously, on the Braita that we mentioned before, that we said that it is me'akev b'diavad. He's saying, no, it's not me'akev b'diavad, so don't worry about it. Okay? So, hi Rabbi Natan. Where's this Rabbi Natan exactly? Where is this Rabbi Natan that he says that it doesn't impede, that you don't really need to eat the Korban Pesach? If you're going to tell me it's this Rabbi Natan, the Tanya was learned to the Braita, Rabbi Natan says, how do we know that all of Bnei Yisrael could be Yotzei Chova with one Korban Pesach? Now, obviously, if there's one Korban Pesach for all of the Jews, is everyone going to eat it? Obviously not, no? Unless you're going to find an animal the size of Og Melech HaBashan, or I don't know what, but I'm saying that there's no, you understand what type of an animal, and we're talking about sheep, remember, we're talking about a 1-year-old sheep. Yeah, we're not talking about one of these big bulls or whatever, we're talking about a small sheep. That's your Korban Pesach. So what type of size are you going to find, the 1-year-old, right, that's going to suffice for the entire Klal Yisrael? So Tamunuman, what? Everyone could slaughter it. One person slaughters a Korban Pesach, not everyone. One person does the shechita, even if you're going to tell me that everyone could eat it, but only one person could do the shechita. But rather this comes to teach you, yeah, that everyone could be Yotzei Chova with one Korban Pesach. Right, because of that. So says the Gemara, it's not true. Maybe it's different over there. Because if these people would come and they would be part of the minuyim, part of the registered people on the Korban, right, that there's not going to be a kazait for one chazilani, it's still fitting for other people, right? And if the other people are going chazilani, which means like this, if you have a whole bunch of people which are registered, so let's say we're all registered. So what's going to happen is if Laurent all of a sudden decides that he doesn't want to eat, so I'm going to be eat it, and then it's fitting for me. If Richard decides that he doesn't want to eat, so then Yisachar is going to eat it, so then it's fitting for him. If Yisachar doesn't want to eat it, so Richard doesn't eat it. Meaning one of the people which are minuyim, whoever it is that they're going to withhold or come back, it's going to be fitting for somebody else. So therefore, it's not a proof to what we're talking about over here. That's what he says. Maybe it's different over there. Because if these people are going to come and they were going to withhold from eating it, it's still a kazai for every single one of the people which are still remaining. And they are a part of the registered people over there. Okay? But rather, so there has to be another concept. Rabbi Natan, which Rabbi Natan? The Tanya was learned in the Tosefta. Nimnu alav chabura achat, v'chazu nimnu alav chabura acheret. Imagine right now I took a Korban Pesach and I said it's going to be for group A. Then afterwards, what happened was I went and I said that this is going to be for group B. Harishonim sheyesh lahem kazait. The first ones that they have a kazait, ochlin, right? They're going to be eating, right? Uptunim milaso Pesach sheni, right? And they're going to be for the Pesach sheni, right? What does that mean for the Pesach sheni, right? Ochlin, and they're going to be ptunim for the Pesach sheni. That means they eat their portion, and they're going to be exempt from doing another Pesach Sheni. Acharonim, but the last people, Shelem Kazait, that they don't have a Kazait, and Ochlim, they're not allowed to eat it. V'chayvim laso Pesach, they have to do a Pesach Sheni. So it comes out, Rabbi Natan says, no, elu, they're all exempt from the Pesach Sheni because the dam was already thrown. Which means like this. What happened exactly? You took a Korban Pesach, right? You first went and you said it's going to be for group A. Okay? Now, this group A, there were tons of people, right? That it had a Kazait for each one of them. Okay, then they went and they said, right, for group B. Now in group B, there was not enough to eat from it. So the Rishonim that they do have enough of a kazait, they eat their portion, and then that's it. They don't have to bring Korban Pesach Sheni. The other people that they didn't have enough of a kazait, so that they didn't have a kazait, so now what's going to happen? They don't eat from it because there wasn't enough. And now they're going to be obligated in Pesach Sheni. So it comes out that they weren't going to be Yotzei Chova. So again, you have two groups, right? I'm going to bring the Korban Pesach. I'm going to say it's group A. Then I'm going to say it's group B. Now they're going to be on both. Now on group A, there was enough. Everyone registered for the same animal, but group A there was enough kazait for each one. Group B there was not enough. So the group A they eat and they're exempt for Korban Pesach Sheni. Group B they're going to be obligated in Korban Pesach Sheni. Says the Binatan.
And that's not true.
It's not true. Everyone's Yotzei Chova. Everyone's you don't have to do Pesachim. So there's a proof that you don't have to eat the Korban Pesach. So says the Gemara, why?
This would help explain why we had hundreds of thousands of people. There must have been a lot of animals being slaughtered in one day.
We said that already. You don't remember?
We say that you don't have to eat.
We already made a calculation.
We
made a whole calculation. You're right, but still, but one animal could be enough for 20 people. Because remember,
it could be enough
eating,
for 200 people at Kazayas.
You could have even 200 people exactly on one thing. We said minimum it was 10 people. You remember when we made the king that he wanted to calculate how many Korban Pesachs they brought. So he saw that it was double the Kiyotzei Mitzrayim.
According to Rav
and they were counting all the livers, and then we said, how do you count the livers and this and that, and you had to throw it right away. They were counting them and going back and forth. Remember? So there was a lot of korbanot brought on the Korban Pesach. Think about it. All the Kohanim were there.
Logistically, I don't know how they could figure that out.
Listen, it was.
My son-in-law asked me, I couldn't answer.
No, put it like this. You have to remember that it was for sure they were chains, which means that they were all the Kohanim were there. So think about it. You know what it is? All the Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash. Think about how many hundreds of Kohanim there, and they're all doing their services quickly, and then they're giving them we're talking about a lot of. What I don't understand is how do they keep track of the animals and keeping track of who's the owners? That must have been.
Where do they eat it? They don't eat it there.
No, they take it out. Yeah, they take it home and eat it.
The logistics.
Well, what do you mean home? Obviously, they're eating it in Eretz Yisrael, but I'm saying, but meaning that they're taking it outside. They're not eating it in the Beit HaMikdash. Yeah. So says the Gemara, Akati dil mashalata still does not approve. Why? Maybe it's still the same thing as we mentioned here. Right? That if the group A, where they did have enough for Kazayda, if they would refrain from eating it, so group B would have enough. So for again, it's not another proof. Right? Because basically, if they're not going to they're not going to eat it, somebody else would eat it. So in Kenneth, so litni, hoil v'ruim limashech. Why does it say that the blood was already sprinkled? Shmamina comes to teach you, badam talimit. Everything has to do with the blood. But the eating itself does not impede. Meaning everything depends upon the blood. As long as the blood is okay, everything else is okay. You didn't eat it, doesn't matter. So my duchke derav demuki namatin lechatchila. Why are you putting the Rami Mishnah as like lechatchila? Ve'Rabbi, right? And according to Rabbi Natan, b'diavad, right? Why are you doing that? Nukmin k'Rabbanan. Why don't we just say that it's going to be like Rabbanan? Even b'diavad, it's not going to help. Which means, why are we going to say that our Mishnah is going that if the basar became tameh, you're not going to sprinkle the blood, and that's only a din lechatchila, but we go like Rabbi Natan b'diavad, that b'diavad it's going to be okay even though nobody ate from it. Why don't we just say that our Mishnah is like Rabbanan, and we say that even b'diavad it's not going to help if they already threw the blood, it doesn't help even b'diavad. So says the Gemara, you understood the question? Meaning, why are we saying that our Mishnah is going in according to Rabbi Natan? I prefer that a Mishnah is in accordance to a group of people, not according to one person. But here you're saying it's going according to Rabbi Natan. But what did he say? He said that it's only a din lechatchila. Don't throw the blood. But if you did, it's going to be okay with the avad. You can't eat the meat. Doesn't matter. Why? Rabbi Natan. We all like Rabbi Natan. You don't have to eat the meat. Says the Gemara, I prefer to come and say that our Mishnah is like Rabbanan. And obviously, it's a din lechatchila. You're not allowed to do it. But if you did do it, even the avad, it's not good. Because you have to eat the meat. And if you didn't eat the meat, it's nothing. I prefer saying it that way. So answers the Gemara, Rav matnitin kashiter. Rav had a question in the Mishnah itself. Why? Why do we say in the Mishnah, right, that if the meat became impure, en zoreket adam, that you don't throw the blood, litni pasul. Say if you were zoreket adam, it's pasul. That means that even b'diavad it's not good. When you say en zoreket adam, it's mashma lechatchila no, but b'diavad it's okay. So that's going like Rabbi Natan. But if you're going to say that it's not good even b'diavad, don't say en zoreket adam. Say it's pasul. If you're zoreket adam, it's pasul. That's what you have to say. So he says, Ela shmamina, but rather it comes to teach you, en zorek lechatchila, but b'diavad shapir dami. It's going to be okay. Okay? So according to Rabbi Natan, until here we're clear or not? One more time. So says the Gemara, according to Rabbi Natan, when it says ish lefi ochlo lamali, when it says ish lefi ochlo, which means that I'm going to learn that a korban needs to be fitting for eating, why do I need that? So answers the Gemara, debayinan gavra dechazil achila. I need a person which is fitting for eating, which means that we need, right, that by the Korban Pesach, we need that the person is fitting for eating. Why do we need the person fitting for eating? Which means like this. This is a concept that we say many, many times, right, which means like this. For example, when you go, exactly, you could do it, which means like this. If you go to the mikveh, you have to do tevilah, you want to dip. Do you have to open up your eyes? You have to open up your mouth? No. You don't have to. But if you have
If
something,
you wanted to.
if you could, if you wanted to, but if you have something in your eyes, let's say you have contacts, or you have something in your mouth, is it a problem with chatzitza? Yes. Why? The answer is very simple. If you could do it and there's nothing which is stopping you, so then you don't need to do it.
So a woman with an eye patch can't go to the mikvah.
Right now, we'll leave that for afterwards, right? Right?
Beyond the scope.
Yeah. Okay. So therefore, what happens now is that says the halacha, right? Remember, all these types of questions ask your local Orthodox rabbi, right? Remember, he to make sure he's Orthodox. Yeah. So what happens is, and he's a man, and he's not. It's not open Orthodox nor modern Orthodox nor the. Okay, fine. So he says over here like this. So he says you need that the person should be fitting for it. Okay. So Mantan al Had Rabbanan, who is the one that taught that the rabbis taught Shechatol leochlav, right? That if you right now you slaughtered the Pesach for the ochlav, v'zarku damo shelo leochlav, and you spill the blood for the people which are not the ones eating it, haPesach atzmo kasher v'adam yotze v'chovto. That the Pesach itself is going to be kosher, and a person is going to be tzedek chovah. So come on, who does this go like? Obviously, Rabbi Natan, not like Rabbanan. Because if right now, what was written here? You just said that you slaughtered it for the people that are going to eat it, for the registered ones, and then you threw the blood for the people which are not going to eat it. Right now, what does it say? The Pesach itself is kosher, but right, and they're going to be tzedek chovah. But how? How is it kosher? How is it going to be kosher? Obviously, it means that it's going to be kosher, even though they're not allowed to eat the meat. So how could that be? So obviously, that's going to be going like Rabbi Natan, not like Rabbanan. So it's like no. Afilu tem Rabbanan. Even if you want to say it's going to Rabbanan, en machshevet ochlin bizrika. The machshevet ochlin has nothing to do with the sprinkling of the blood. Meaning the machshevet ochlin is only on the shchita, not on the sprinkling of the blood. Meaning as long as you slaughtered it properly, and I had it for the shem, for the whoever it is that are going to the registered people, it's going to be okay. Later on, when I was sprinkling the blood, I was thinking that it's going to be for people that they can't eat anyway. It doesn't matter. Because the machshava of ochlin, of eating, is only on that. Okay? Who's the one that the rabbis taught? One of the person sick, which means that they cannot eat a kazait during the time of shchita. The chalim, and then he became cured. He became healthy again. B'shat zika, at the time of the zika. Chalim b'shat shchita v'chole, or he was sick at the time, right? Or he became better during the time of shchita v'chole, and then he became sick during the time of shchita, the zrika, of the sprinkling. En shochtim v'lo zorkim alav. You're not allowed to slaughter or to do zrika on him. He has to be healthy during the time of the shchita until the time of the zrika. So who does this go like? Obviously, this is going like, you're going to say it's Rabbanan, not like Rabbi Natan. Because here it says that you see, it has to be from the shchita until the zrika. So it says, no. Afilu tem Rabbi Natan, even when you're going to tell me it's going to shtat Rabbi Natan, gavra dechazu lachila bainin. You always need a person which is fitting during the entire time for achila. And here, that means even during the time of the zrika, it has to be fitting for eating. So Mantan al-Had Rabbanan, who's the one that taught this one? There's a third right now, where it says shechato b'ta'ara. Imagine a person comes and he shechted the animal, the korban pesach, when he was pure, and then afterwards the owners became impure. So you're going to throw the blood impurity. Okay, you're not allowed to eat the meat with impurity. Who does that go like? Right? So Amar Rabbi Elazar says Rabbi Elazar machloket. This is actually a machloket, and therefore this is shitat Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Yochanan comes and he says, no, even if you're going to tell me it's the rabbis, right? Still, he wants to come and he wants to say, he comes and he says like this. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Tafilu tem Rabbanan." Even you're going to tell me it's Rabbanan. Hachamaskina, what are we dealing with? B'tzibur, right? Dafilu b'tumah nami avde. Because even if it's going to be betumah, also they're going to do the same thing. Okay, which means because if the tzibur are able to do all the avodat pesach, even betumah, so they're going to be fitting. So says the Gemara, if we're talking about it's tumah betzibur, why can't you eat it? You just told me that if the entire tzibur is tameh, or the majority of the tzibur, doesn't have to be the entire, majority of the tzibur are tameh, they're allowed to bring it and they're allowed to eat it. So what are you talking about here betzibur? So says the Gemara, no, it's a gezerah shema yitameu be'alim lachar zrika. Here the reason why is a gezerah midrabanan for the next year, because maybe what's going to happen is the majority of the tzibur are going to become tamim after the zrika, and then they're going to say eshtakad last year lo nitmenu ve'achalnu, right? We weren't tamim after the beginning of the avodah, and we ate it. Hashtanami nechot, so too now we're going to eat it. V'lo yadi, but they didn't realize the ishtakak is direct dam ba'alim tamim avu. They didn't know the last year when they spilled the blood, when they sprinkled the blood, the ba'alim were tamim, and here now the ba'alim were teorim, and they only became tamim afterwards. Which means that since it didn't come betumah, they're not allowed to eat it afterwards betumah. Meaning like this: if right now they were pure, and they only became tameh after the zrika, So now, even if the majority tzibur are tmeim, they're not allowed to eat it because it was brought b'tahara. Now they're going to make a mistake. They're going to say, 1 second, but last year we did eat it. 1 second, they didn't realize that last year they were already tmeim during the time of zrika. Now they were tehorim during the time of zrika. So therefore, since they were tehorim during the time of zrika, that's why they're not allowed to eat it afterwards. And therefore, because of that mistake, that's why they made a gezerah, even though usually we do not make such a gezerah. Okay? Okay, there's another, you know what? Let's let's just go Vibaitema, or if you want, you could answer another answer, right? We're just going to go to the 2 dots on Ayin Tetamud Aleph, right? 79A1. Vibaitema, if you want, you could answer another answer. Rav holds like Rabbi Yoshua. The time is we learned in the right Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua says, all the sacrifices in the Torah, ben shenitma basar v'chelev kayam, whether it became tameh, the basar, and the chelev, but the chelev is kayam, ben shenitma chelev basar kayam, or the chelev became tameh, and the basar, the flesh is still going to be okay. Zoreket adam, you're going to sprinkle the blood. Nazir ve'oseh Pesach, if he's a Nazir and he's doing the Korban Pesach, nitma chelev basar kayam, and right, if the chelev becomes tameh and the basar is still good, zoreket adam, you sprinkle the blood. But if it's nitma basar v'chelev kayam, you don't sprinkle the blood lechatachila. But if you did do it, hurtza b'diavad. Nitmeu be'alim. What happens if the ba'alim, the owners, became tmeim bemet? Right? Lo yizrok, you don't throw the blood. But if you did throw the blood, lo hurtza, even b'diavad, it's not going to help. Right? So here it doesn't help, even b'diavad. Right? Why? Because
it's one making the Pesach.
Yeah, because he's a Nazir. So therefore, a Nazir that became Tameh, if he became Tameh before the Zrika, so he loses his Naziruto until now, and he has to start again.
But the Nazir and the one making the Pesach,
yes.
Not a Nazir who was making the Pesach. You're offering of a Nazir and one who is making the Pesach. What does that mean?
Okay. Fine, so we got to the 2 dots, and B'ezrat Hashem we continue tomorrow.